Minister, I just want to take you up on your earlier offer for ideas in terms of the July stimulus. I heard you in your speech earlier on. And I want to focus on a few particular groups because I think that the pandemic and the lockdown affected huge numbers of people in terms of their income, their employment and their livelihoods, but there are very particular groups that have been very, very hard hit and are likely to be hard hit for the foreseeable future as long as COVID-19 remains with us. I think as well as big, broad measures and schemes like the microfinance amendment, to the microfinance bill that you're making, we need to be very specific in looking at sectors that are particularly hard hit and where big, broad policy moves don't really capture the specifics of their particular sector. And I think it is even more important to make that point on the day that's in it, because all day I have been receiving calls from two of those sectors, and they're sectors that I have raised with you when you were in government. Well, you're still in government in a slightly different form, before the establishment of the new government, repeatedly over the last number of weeks. The taxi drivers and people in arts, live entertainment, music and the gig economy. Because many of them today found that their PUP payments were cut from the 350 payment to the 203 payment. And that is because, and I did warn the government that this was coming, a failure to recognise the specifics of their particular situation. And now people whose incomes and livelihoods and frankly futures for the foreseeable future have been devastated by the COVID situation are being kicked when they're down. There's no other way to describe it. They're being kicked, and they were kicked this morning with letters informing them that their payments were being cut. The PUP payments were being cut, and there's more of this likely to happen next week, because if you're on the payment and you don't sort of jump through a number of other hoops early next week, you're going to have your payment cut as well. So let me just be more specific in this regard, and let's start with taxi drivers. Okay, so taxi drivers whose income was deemed to be less than €200 are having their payment cut. But in fact, this turns out to be a huge cohort of taxi drivers, partly because it's based on 2018 figures, which is sort of random enough in itself, but also because they have very significant outgoings that reduce their incomes, but which those outgoings continue during COVID when their income disappeared, and against a background where if they return to work, and now there's pressure on them to return to work because their payment has been cut, and some of them mightn't want to because they're still worried about the health situation, but even if they do want to, they know they are going back to employment in a situation where their income is not likely to recover to anything even close to pre-COVID levels for the foreseeable future.
We're on the second stage of a very specific bill.
But here's a group.
And in talking about the bill, you're meant to talk about its contents or what might reasonably be expected to be in it. I haven't heard you getting to. I presume you're expanding on what might be in it.
And who doesn't benefit?
Talking about something completely
no,
different,
and who does?
then you're out of order.
Well, first of all, the minister invited suggestions in this debate specifically about the July stimulus, right? He did actually invite that.
Well,
so I'm responding to that invite.
Maybe he did, but the standing orders require you to address your attention to what's in the bill or to what you think should be in it.
Yeah, well, the taxi drivers as a group are actually excluded from nearly all of these supports for reasons I don't understand. Apparently, I was trying to get some of the taxi drivers to explain it to me. It was something to do with the fact that they don't pay VAT, or they don't charge VAT. I didn't, frankly, fully understand it, but I know they're excluded from a lot of the support schemes for small enterprise. They don't pay rates, right? Okay, so that's an unfairness. Because many of them have, for example, been told you're not really going to get any work, or it's very difficult to get work, and there's very little work around anyway unless you put in screens. And in any event, the NTA hasn't told them what a standard screen that would cover, the pass muster in terms of insurance and so on would actually look like, because there hasn't been clear direction on that, and also just because they have continued costs during this period, like repayments on their cars, like ongoing maintenance of their cars, insurance costs, and a whole series of ongoing costs. Even though they weren't working, those costs continue, and if they return to work, and they're obviously under more pressure to do so now because their payments are being cut. As I said, when they return to work, they're going to find that their income is insufficient to cover those costs anyway. They won't be able to pay their insurance. And just remind ourselves that taxi drivers at the moment, if you're lucky, you're paying 2 or 3 grand in insurance, but if you're not so lucky, you'll be paying 4, 5 and up to 10,000 euro in some cases in insurance. You might be paying about 600 euro per month on the repayments on your car. You'll be paying maintenance of probably about 2,000 euro a year. And when you are back driving, and these days, if you go back on the road, you'll be paying about 7,000 euro a year in fuel, but you'll be driving around the streets looking for customers, not able to find any.
Micro-enterprise.
I'm saying that they are micro-enterprises. They are the definition of a micro. In fact, they're the most micro of micro-enterprises, and they deserve a bit of support.
Different. If you're not addressing, Deputy Boyd Barrett, if you're not you're here a long time now. You know the rules fairly well. If you're not addressing what's in the bill or what you think should be in the bill, then you're not compliant with standing orders. We all could get up and start waxing lyrical about all sorts of things that are important, and what you're talking about is vitally important, but I'm afraid it's not relevant.
It's a micro-enterprise, so yes.
Yeah, no, but we're not talking about...
I think any bill that the government should put forward supporting micro-enterprises should take these specifics into account. Yes, that's what I do.
Go on.
That's the point I'm making. And I'm appealing for the government to do that, and in the meantime, I'm appealing to the government not to cut their payments and to maintain those payments as income subsidies, not because they don't want to stay unemployed, they don't particularly want an unemployment payment, they want to be able to work, but they want to be, there has to be a recognition on the government's part, and this is true of lots of other of these micro-enterprises, that for them, and often it's the ones who are worst hit, there is no likelihood of a full recovery anytime soon. So we need to maintain income subsidies to them, but also then allow them to earn on top of that, until they get to a point where they can stand on their own 2 feet because there is a genuine recovery. So that's the point I'm making, Count Corla. And a similar point we made, I heard Deputy Murphy mentioning sound engineers, but you could generalise that more to people right across the arts and live entertainment and music industry. Again, by the way, in most cases, people who will not benefit from this bill and won't be able to access these loans and wouldn't pass muster or wouldn't even be considered for many of these things, even though they are freelancers or lone lone traders. And just again for the Minister to sort of understand this, if you're somebody who plays in the pubs and clubs in Temple Bar, prior to the outbreak of the pandemic, you would have been getting about €130 for 2 hours working in Temple Bar. Now, if you can get a gig in Temple Bar, you'll be offered €30 for 2 hours, if you're lucky enough to get a gig. And that's just not viable. Now, but those people have just had their payments cut. So what do? How do we help them? So I'm just asking for, and similarly for people in the who are involved in organising live music events and so on, a bit like taxi drivers who have ongoing costs of insurance, storage of equipment, repayments on equipment they've purchased, and so on, but have no income coming in. And even if things recover a bit, and there's no likelihood any time in the near future that there will be a significant recovery, those costs continue for them. But many of the supports that are being designed are not available to them, but they're also having their payments cut now. Many of them are having their payments cut. Now. So those are the two particular groups I wanted to speak up for. And then finally, maybe very specifically on the bill itself, Ceann Comhairle. I was talking to somebody today or yesterday in Dáil Éireann who has, is the definition of a firm that's supposed to be covered by this bill, who has, they make sofas, and they have 8 employees, just below the threshold of 9 required. But they are having difficulty basically being told they can't, they can't pass the criteria necessary to do it, but also worried about to access these loans, but also worried about taking on extra debt and about the interest and so on that. So I think we need again to have a scheme where we really work with the micro-enterprise, look at the particular difficulties they're facing and tailor the supports in that way, and not have rigid criteria or excessive interest rates or a debt burden that is just going to not make the supports sustainable for those particular businesses. So I'll leave it at that, Ceann Comhairle. Thanks for your forbearance.
Yeah.